want to be more productive by just jamming your calendar full of things to do, but you want to focus on how you're actually spending your time. You want to focus on what it is that you're spending your time on and how you're spending it, and that is actually really good time management. Welcome to the Weekly Leadership Experience, a place for leaders to get inspired, be challenged, and grow. I am your host, Reshad Oberlander. Let's get started. Today's episode of the Weekly Leadership Experience is brought to you by my 7-day Leadership Growth Challenge. It's a free challenge that I've created, and it's delivered by email over the course of 7 days. I've created 7 compelling questions to challenge various aspects of your leadership, the way you lead, and why you lead. Go to ReshadOberlander.com and scroll down until you find the 7-day leadership challenge, or look for the link in the show notes. Time is a valuable thing. Watch it fly by as the pendulum swings. Watch it count down to the end of the day. The clock ticks life away. Hello, leaders, and welcome to this week's show. Famous lyrics from the band Linkin Park and Mike Shinoda from the song In the End. And I thought it was a good quote to start off with today. I'd like to talk about time, and I'd like to talk about it in a short episode today, but just a little bit about making time for time. Making time for how you spend your time, making time to make sure you have time for yourself, time for the important things in life. It's not about productivity as much as it is about making sure that your priorities are in order and you're doing what is important to you. Time can easily be taken away from you very quickly if you don't set priorities and if you don't have boundaries. And, time can often, and I know it's true for me, but sometimes it's like, wow, I don't feel like I have enough time to do what I want to do. And that can be true if there's a number of important things to get done, but sometimes it's a misguided sense of trying to be doing as many things as possible. And, productivity becomes a bad idea because we think productivity is about getting as much as possible done in as short as time as possible, whereas I think that there's a lot of really great expert opinions out there, and I'm in agreement with them that productivity isn't so much about how much you can get done in a span of time as it is about getting the important things done. So, talking about time, some of the things I'd like to think about and talk about as we go through this episode is time and managing your time isn't just about scheduling your time better, but it's actually doing a better job of how you spend your time. So this is a little bit what I was just saying is that, you don't want to be more productive by just jamming your calendar full of things to do, but you want to focus on how you're actually spending your time. You want to focus on what it is that you're spending your time on and how you're spending it, and that is actually really good time management. Peter Drucker talks about time management in a bit more of an organized sense in terms of listing activities. And then you want to list all your activities, then you want to filter those activities based on some criteria. So first of all, if you ask yourself, you look at your list of activities, the first one on the list, what would happen if you didn't do that at all? That task just wouldn't be done. What would happen? Is it something that would cause things to fall apart? Then maybe it's an important task. Is it something that you could not do and it would be okay? Then, let's maybe not do that task. Which of these activities would be done by someone else at least as well? Of course, this is a bit more of a workplace idea. So could you give that activity away? Can you give it to someone else who could do it as well as you can? And then final question in that filter would be, what do I do that wastes your time without contributing to your effectiveness? So looking at those list of activities, what are some of the activities you can filter out and get rid of? The next thing that Peter Drucker talks about in terms of managing your time is looking at all the discretionary time that you have, i.e., time that is not spent on specific tasks, and you want to block those pieces of time together so that you have the largest, time chunks where you have discretionary time to spend. So, time, you can have a lot of it, you can have a little of it, you can feel like you don't have enough, you can feel like you have too much. It kind of depends on your perspective about it. Some of my favorite work on productivity, managing your time, things like that, come from Michael Hyatt, Megan Hyatt Miller, where one of the most influential books on like how I approach, my life plan, so to speak, and how I manage my time is I try to block out when I'm going to do certain things so that I know that, on a Monday I'm focused on doing this or that or the other thing, and that's that time that's reserved for that activity, and it's on my calendar, and I try to stay dedicated to it, and it's my time, and I give it a purpose before it's sort of taken away from me, so to speak, right? Like if you don't use your time, if you don't put your time to work, if you don't schedule what you need to do, then it's easy to get distracted and kind of have your time managed for you. So that's kind of like on a productivity, kind of a scheduling, kind of a work idea, right? But there's also an important element of this in terms of um, work-life balance, and you can have work-life balance. I do believe that. The other terminology might be work-life integration because there's some overlap, which is true too. But you have to really set boundaries. You have to have some non-negotiables. Michael Hyatt and Megan Hyatt Miller in their new book, um, Win at Work and Succeed at Life, they talk about having non-negotiable standards where you have certain standards that are just not negotiable. They're just not an option. You have self-care standards that you just do that every day. You take care of it. You know that it gets done. You have it blocked off. It's in your calendar or your time manager, and you know that it's going to get done. Now, that's not to say that you become a stickler and you're a rigid, unyielding rock, because that probably won't work at times as well. There will be instances where you need to, be flexible and do something else that might be required. But, 95% of the time, you're sticking to your guns on some of these non-negotiable standards in your life. And you have to decide what those things are. You have to decide what's really important to you. You have to decide what really matters, and, do that instead of all these extraneous things that are the false sense of productivity and being accomplished with your time. So I think it's incredibly important to consider how you spend your time. I think it's incredibly important to look at what you do with your time, how it's spent, and particularly if you have a feeling of not having enough time. I think it's definitely important to consider what it is that's on your schedule, what's on your checklist, what's on your to-do list. Are there some things that are maybe not as important, and you're just kind of shoving them in there because you feel like you have to be productive in order to feel like you've done anything? Focus on what's important. In my life, I could talk about lots of different things. I have a full-time job, I have family, I have this podcast, which I love all of those things, but it's easy to become bogged down and overwhelmed with the podcast, for example, because if I'm not careful, if I don't manage the time that I spend on it, I can become easily overwhelmed. I can become easily sort of quote unquote too busy to do anything, right? I come home and spend every evening working on the podcast and not spending time with with my family and loved ones. Is like I can easily get there if I don't monitor how I spend my time, what I spend my time on, which is why certain activities have to be monitored and limited so that I spend an appropriate amount of time on this, I spend an appropriate amount of time at work, and then I get time with my family and things that are important to me. So it's important to consider how you're spending your time and make time for time. Make time for what's important. And there's lots of different ways you can go about it, as I've talked about in this episode. But I think the number one thing can pretty much be summed up with being intentional about how you spend your time. And it doesn't mean that you're doing more in the time that you have. It's doing a better job of how you spend the time that you have. Thanks for listening. I hope you got something out of this episode. I'd love to hear what you thought about it. How do you spend your time? How do you manage your time? Do you feel overwhelmed? Do you feel like you don't have enough time? Let me know. Email me, Reshad@ReshadOberlander.com, or hit me up on social media. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Talk to you again next week. In the meantime, stay awesome. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, would you head over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe, leave me a rating, leave me a review, and share this with a friend. It spreads the word and helps the podcast grow. You can also find me on social media at RE Oberlander. Until next time, stay awesome.